on time. We're up to 52 participants. I'm going to start on time. I want to thank Andrea and Jordan for making themselves available to work with us today to communicate with you what's been developing and what is going to develop around tri-agency data management policy. This is going to have system-wide effects on the university, and it's not at this point a mandated requirement, but it's coming. And so we wanted to give everybody a heads up and have a chance for you to ask questions of both Andrea and Jordan today as we go forward. I don't think this is unique to Canada. As you start going forward more and more in other countries, this is becoming an issue around data repositories made available to, especially to the public. I think we're going to find that this is not something that we can just walk away from. So thank you all for attending. And without further ado, as we're up to into the 70s now, an expanding audience. I'm not sure, Andrea or Jordan, who's going to start, but I'll turn it over to the two of you. And I just ask everybody to keep their screens muted until we have question and answers coming at the end. And we hopefully will have lots of time for Q&A.
All right, thank you, Dr. Nickerson. So yes, my name is Jordan Bass. I'm the coordinator for research services and digital strategies here at the UM Libraries. I'll let my colleague, Andrea Szwajcer, introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Andrea Szwajcer. I'm the Research Services Librarian. I work with Jordan as part of the Research Services and Digital Strategies unit in the libraries at the University of Manitoba.
Thanks, Andrea. So this afternoon, Andrea and I will be providing an overview of the newly minted Tri-Agencies Research Data Management Policy. Just before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. We will begin our question and answer discussion at the end of the presentation. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. And when we begin to the discussion component, we'll address each question in the order they were submitted. If you want to make a point or say something over audio, please raise your hand and we'll take them in order as we see them. So just a reminder to raise your hand, please click on the participants icon in your display and you will see the participant functionality available to you, including the button to raise your hand. Once you've been invited to speak, please lower your hand so we can keep track of audience response. Okay, so again, just in terms of introduction, this is very much a high level overview of this policy. The policy has been made available to all U of M faculty and students and staff. We'll encourage you all to take a look at that. It's not too lengthy, but we understand there is going to be a lot of questions, so we will get to them. Next slide, please, Andrea. The University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in a partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Next slide, please. All right, so the RDM policy, or DM policy as we're going to refer to it, has three core components, which are an institutional strategy, data management plans, and data deposit. Before we get into description of each one of these components, please note at the bottom of each of these, there's an expected date or compliance date, I guess is what we refer to it as. So an institutional strategy, that component is expected March 1, 2023, data management plan spring 2022, which is the earliest, and then data deposit, which is to be determined. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go along here. So some quick preamble before, oh, one more back, Andrea, sorry. Just some quick preamble from the agencies. The tri-agencies expect that research they fund will be conducted to the highest professional and disciplinary standards, domestically and internationally. These standards support research excellence by ensuring that research is performed ethically and makes good use of public funds, experiments and studies are replicable, and research results are accessible to as many people as possible. Research data management, or RDM, is a necessary part of research excellence. The agencies believe that research data collected through the use of public funds should be responsibly and securely managed, and B, where ethical, legal, and commercial obligations allow, available for reuse by others. That's a very large statement, and we'll get into that. To this end, the agencies support the FAIR principles, which are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. These are the guiding principles for research data management and stewardship. So as for the components, the institutional strategy. Each post-secondary institution or research hospital eligible to administer CIHR, NSERC, or SHRC funds is required to create an institutional RDM strategy and notify the agencies when it has been completed. The strategy must be made publicly available on the institution's website. Again, this is expected March 1, 2023. Data management plans. All grant proposals submitted to the agencies should include methodologies that reflect best practices in RDM. For certain funding opportunities, the agencies will require data management plans, or DMPs, to be submitted to the appropriate agency at the time of application, as outlined in the call for proposals. In these cases, the DMPs will be considered in the adjudication process. And again, this is for certain funding opportunities. And this is expected in spring 2022. Data deposit. Grant recipients are required to deposit into a digital repository all research data, metadata, and code that directly support the research conclusions in journal publications and preprints that arise from agency-supported research. Determining what counts as relevant research data and which data should be preserved is often highly contextual and should be guided by disciplinary norms. There's a lot we can say about data deposit, which we will, but again, that is to be determined in terms of where data is being deposited and what types of data is being deposited. Next slide, please. So the institutional strategy, this is a big one. This is for all of us here at the U of M. In terms of an institutional strategy, the idea here is that what Trices is trying to do is first wanting us to show in our statement that we acknowledge that research data is important. It furthermore wants us to demonstrate that we support researchers and meet compliance frameworks. We are expected to promote data management to researchers, staff, and students. The U of M is obligated to provide guidance and show that we have adopted DM best practices within our institutional policy. We furthermore support access to DM services throughout the research lifecycle. And of course, data with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities are managed by OCAP care principles, respecting distinctions, a distinctions-based approach. Next slide. So in terms of the institutional strategy, there is a steering committee that has been struck here at the U of M, and what we'll be looking at are the three core areas that we just spoke of, and ramping up towards having that institutional statement. So right now, status is in progress. So Portage and the new Digital Research Infrastructure Organization, which is a federal entity, has released an IS template, or had released actually an IS template in early 2020. So we do have some examples we can look at. Nationally, institutions are in various states of readiness. So just looking at U15, people are at different points across Canada, which includes us. The U of M has a nascent draft strategy, but we are waiting further training for maturity. And again, we're looking at fall 2021. And again, with the steering committee being struck. So over to you, Andrea.
So the second piece of the policy is data management plans. And so overall, the policy describes essentially what data management plans are. And so a plan includes how your data will be collected, documented, formatted, protected, and preserved, how existing data sets will be used, and what new data will be created. So there's a reuse as well as creation component. Whether your data will be shared and how it will be shared, and where that data will be deposited for reuse and sharing. So overarching incorporated into the data management plans is roles and responsibilities of each member of the research team, succession plans for your research, any ethical, legal, commercial constraints that influence and are imposed on that research, and then the frameworks that govern that research. So in terms of support, that is ongoing. We, in the last few years, we have offered consultation and training and is available upon request. We have developed a web page which provides some resources as well as guidance, as well as access to the data management plan assistant, which is a Portage and Andrea platform that will provide access to templates and DMP exemplars through that, and is a national platform available to everyone for free to register. So if you have not done that, we encourage you to do that. It has been recently upgraded to 2.0. That functionality includes versioning as well as more administrative backend, and happy to talk about that if you wish. There are a lot more resources now available in terms of templates come out from Portage, as well as exemplars to give guidance on particular methodologies and considerations that way. So again, we're happy to talk about that in the question answer. In terms of data deposit, we would like to emphasize the following points. Data that directly supports research described in publication is what is expected for deposit when that becomes mandated, which is not right now. However, it is encouraging you to consider that. And of course, in terms of the data management plan, those considerations should be articulated there. Deposit to be made by publication. Choice of repository is at the researcher's discretion. So what it means by publication is when you're at the point of publishing on your data is when you are also expected to deposit if you are choosing to deposit. Deposit is distinct from sharing. This is a very key piece that we wish to emphasize. There is no obligation to make all or any data open. However, researchers are expected to adhere to FAIR principles whenever possible. So i.e. there is a strong encouragement for deposit, and of course deposit is different from sharing. You can deposit and still have restrictions, you know, it can be completely closed, but you can offer a demonstration of deposit on request if you need. Above data deposit stipulations will be exempted and are in accordance with guidance from the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities for research conducted by and with those communities. So of course, in keeping with OCAP and CARE principles, deposit is first and foremost under the jurisdiction of those communities when those communities are actively involved in the research. Next steps. Again, data deposit is available at this institution via Dataverse. We offer consultation and training. There are, of course, other repositories that can be considered for deposit, national repositories such as Verter. Happy to talk about that. These are resources that we have built for deposit education and support. Note the exception for Dataverse at this time on the slide. And as I said in the slide, we're happy to talk further about if that's a question. So we provide some background information around some of the concepts we've discussed in this presentation. And we have offered several videos that we have made for education purposes. So we invite you to look at them at your leisure. And at this time, we invite questions. We recognize that the raising hand functionality does not seem to be available on this particular Zoom platform. So if people wish to sort of put their questions in a chat, we can just say that you wish to speak, we can manage it that way.
Looks like we have one here, Andrea. I caught it when you were just ending, so I'll address that first. How will that fit with Personal Health Information Act restrictions? Very good point. In 2018, when this draft came out, this draft policy, we heard a lot of that from the 2 town halls we participated in. Again, it does go back to that broader statement, which I know has to be better defined, but grant recipients are not required to share their data if there is ethical, cultural, legal, and commercial concerns. I guess like there will be some kind of allowance or exemption. There has to be. We do not know what those are yet. Andrea, I don't know if you wanted to add any more to that part on FIA or even FIPA in Manitoba.
In terms of deposit, I think there'll be a lot more work from Portage in terms of there's a sensitivity data committee. They've released a nice guideline September 2020 that starts to begin to provide some guidance to researchers around curation, de-identification standards, those kinds of things, engagement of risk. Or assessment of risk of your project. So I think in terms of sensitivity, it's my understanding from the tri-agency representatives that they are going to wait on institutional strategies to then further inform deposit mandates. So. So you can raise your hand according to reactions.
Yeah, Andrea, I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm kind of, you know, I understand the intent, but I'm also hearing lots of caveats about that you don't necessarily have, you can deposit your data, but you don't have to make it accessible. So it seems kind of like it's counterintuitive to what you're trying, what's trying to be achieved here. So can I understand maybe what is the principal purpose of depositing the data? Is it so that others in the future could go back and recapitulate your findings if it was accessible? Like I kind of am missing the optionality here about whether you have to make it accessible, or it's if it's been tri-agency funded, or it's only if you feel like it. Like, can you clarify this?
Yeah, so deposit has two functions. There is a discovery function and there's a preservation function. Preservation for reuse. So, and I should say reuse doesn't necessarily just include other people. It also includes yourself. So what tri-agency is trying to do here is encourage people to think about, and this is part of where data management plans come in, is your curation intentions and to document that. So when you get to the point of preservation, you're anticipating, because some people do choose to publish in journals that are now requiring to essentially reinforce what other funder mandates are requiring is deposit. So you are to try and anticipate that so that you're not caught off guard when you get to that point and you make decisions around publication. So that's the first piece. The second piece, I mean, sharing is always limited and constrained by licenses, whether that's commercial licenses you've engaged in, or it could be REB considerations as well. So any data deposit that you must consider or think about should be in those ways. And so data can always have terms of use conditions applied, right? And so again, that's part of the data management plan, is thinking through what those would be so that when you come to that point, you can document it accordingly. So, so that's where the difference between sharing and deposit comes in, is that deposit can be just, it's essentially it's a bank. Think of it as a bank, you know, like the Royal Bank or whatever. You put your money there, not necessarily to share it with other people, but for accessible to you or for those that you deem meet your conditions for sharing.
And so maybe the other aspect of this, and I'm just going to ask a few questions and see if I can channel other people's thoughts here. But does this also mean that the HREB or BREB has to pre-approve how you're depositing it to make sure that if it's like, for example, patient level data, that it's de-identified, truly de-identified. What is the a requirement for before deposit it being reviewed by or approved by somebody who understands whether what you've deposited there is truly de-identified?
So that's part of what Jordan can speak to in terms of the institutional strategies, in terms of policies and standards in terms of de-identification. To the best of my knowledge, at this institution, we do not have such policy governing de-identification standards. So this is one big question for us. In terms of REBs, I cannot speak for BREB or HREB. In terms of for Gary, REBs, at least for myself as chair, I ask that, and there is boilerplate language that PNAR has established for secondary use, and then we ask that all approved applications include that secondary use boilerplate language and consent, so that but that's only if people indicate they're going to deposit. So that's so again, this is where the DMPs come in, is that you need to anticipate deposit well before you are obligated to deposit. So. And
if you host your data set, for example, at a place like MCHP, where things are all de-identified, is that considered a deposit? Or do you have to do an extract of that time and date stamp of when you published to host it in a separate place to deposit the data?
I'm going to let Jordan answer that one.
Yeah. No, I think the past two questions are kind of getting at a core issue here, and that's in terms of identifying at the U of M which repositories are used for what types of data. Right now, we don't have any policy or procedure around that. So for instance, the library supports a number of databases. Chief among them is our Dataverse repository. We do have other kind of discipline-specific repositories and work with externals. However, we realized at Bannatyne there is MCHP. We also know that there's the SRE, the Secure Research Environment. You know, I think we've been working with IST and some other groups for a while now, trying to identify which repositories are going to be used for what data. But Andrea's quite correct that all of this has to be addressed in that REB intake. And I think Dr. Nickerson, that's what you're getting at. And we simply just don't have the policy or procedure right now. And I would hope that that's something the steering committee would be looking at right out of the gate.
And do you know who's representing us on the steering committee?
I have a list. I could read it off to you right now. This came out from Digver last week, I believe. So it is Jay Doring, Lisa O'Hara, Tracy Moore, Lynn Hebert, legal, myself, Tara Bunio from IST, Randy Jameson, Faculty of Graduate Studies, Hope Anderson, Associate Dean of Research, College of Pharmacy, David Barber, Associate Dean, Research Faculty of Environment, Earth, and Resources. There's two other spots on there to be determined. So I guess in terms of Rady faculty, it's probably going to be Hope Anderson, Associate Dean, Research, College of Pharmacy.
Yeah, I might encourage you to consider one of our data experts, especially around curation and this sort of thing that we have within the faculty, just so that, you know, in that sense, it may be a liaison to someone like, for example, from MCHP that could at least articulate what the barriers or gaps might be specifically around those types of data sets. And then, you know, if we are in Dataverse that you're talking about, how secure is that? And if we put our data there, is all of a sudden it now beyond our control? I mean, we can put our restrictions there, but how do we know that A, it's not going to get hacked, and B, that someone's not going to discard what we think and just make it available to others? What's our protections in this?
In terms of the Dataverse repository, all the libraries really does with that repository is we provide training and startup on creating that Dataverse environment for researchers. There is typically 1 to 2 administrators of that project within Dataverse. They assign all of the roles and all the permissions to certain data sets. You know, of the 111 research projects we have in there right now, a lot of them are unpublished or private. So no one's seeing that. They're not being made publicly accessible. What they're able to do is, within certain elements of that project, release certain data sets for access, public access, or sharing. The rest of it remains dark, if we want to use that term, and is kept in that repository environment. It's administered by typically the PI.
I'm glad to know we're in the dark web here now, Jordan. I'm going to stop
it's not
questions, and I'll let others. There's a lot of other questions coming up here. I don't want to monopolize everything, and I see some other hands, so I'll turn it over to you to continue on with the rest.
So I'm just going to let Jude speak if he wants to turn his mic on. He has his hand raised, and then we'll go through some of the questions in the chat.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, my questions were in part some of the issues that Peter raised. And from what Jordan said, I read that memo from the US office. The two to be determined individuals are most likely students. They were reserved for students. So I think there is really a need to have somebody from here from the Rady in charge of data management in that committee. The MCHP, we need somebody from that to be involved. Well, the question I was going to ask was really depending on the answers we were given. When you look at the plan, the CIHR, the tri-councils are going to start operating this in spring 2022, but yet the institutions are not going to submit their guidelines until 2023. So you would think researchers should be doing this in the context of what is developed by their institutions. So how come they are rolling it out even before the institutions have been able to submit their plans?
Well, I could again speak to it's not being rolled out immediately. Like the big thing is to start these data management plans by spring 2022. There's obvious consultation that's going to happen with all areas of the U of M. Right now, we're starting from, as Andrew said, kind of boilerplate templates that have been developed by Carl Portage and Andrea. So there will be opportunities to inform those, but it's not like we have to have all of this ready for tomorrow, especially data deposit.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, I don't understand how the tri-councils want to start implementing by spring 2022. Yet they have given institutions 2023 to have a plan. So I don't understand that. It's a disconnect between them. Thank you.
So one of the next questions is how does extend to methods, protocols, code, etc. that are not routinely published? I can answer that, and Jordan can follow up. So data deposit, as you may or may not be aware, there is approximately 2,800 different types of repositories available in the world where one can deposit. There are code deposits, code repositories, there are software repositories, there's protocols repositories. So for example, you may be familiar with protocols.io is a repository for protocols. Code, there is CodeOcean, which is another repository specifically for code. So if you're not clear about where to deposit, we're happy to meet with you to discuss what your considerations around deposit are. I hope that answers your question. I don't know if Jordan wants to follow up with that one.
Well, this is not actually my question because I know where to deposit it. I'm just wondering what the requirement is for depositing code methods, especially as it relates to some might be IP, etc. So is that expected to be shared? Because for data, you could raise privacy issues, etc. But for code, there's no privacy. There's no privacy expectation. So is that required to be deposited as well?
So again, all requirements around deposit are governed by your IP considerations, your publication choices, and ethics obligations. So taking all of those things into account, you may deposit, but you may not necessarily make it publicly available. Okay, so there's many, many ways to share. You do not need to have it open. It's not a binary thing here. You can make it restrictions that accord with your terms of use or licensing or other considerations. Okay, you can still deposit and not necessarily make it publicly available. Hope that answers the question.
Yes.
Okay. Next question. Administrative data studies with Data Management Center uses many government departmental data. Is HSAL families, vital statistics, etc. on board with me depositing their data? Again, it is all deposit is subject to overarching frameworks and constraints that inform your data. So if you're not allowed to share, then you don't share. You deposit, and again, that's based on curation. So if it's de-identified and all those other things, then you can probably deposit, but not make available, or deposit with like available upon request or some other kinds of criteria that you stipulate. So I hope that clarifies that. Next question. And then MCHP has a default data sharing statement that explains why not. So they have already, so again, there's the constraints already clearly laid out. So that's on the researcher to understand that. Are there existing best practices for deposit sharing for qualitative studies, for example, transcripts? Jordan, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, and just to go back quickly to about the data sharing agreements, again, that's doing things, as we mentioned, more upstream and having that sorted out right at the beginning. So yeah, if you have a data sharing agreement that explains why not, that's perfect. You know, it doesn't have to be how you're working around that existing data sharing statement. It's basically saying this is what we decided, and this is how we will continue with our study and share or not share or deposit in the end. Sorry, the other one being, is there existing best practices for deposit sharing with qualitative studies, for example, transcripts? I know right now, and again, just speaking to the repositories that the libraries use, there's a lot of audio video interviews for certain qualitative projects. And the transcripts are also in a number of those project environments. So in terms of best practices for sharing of a qualitative study, something like that, again, going back to repositories, I think Dataverse is a good option. There are, again, external discipline-specific repositories. So depending on what your academic discipline is, there might be something outside of the U of M that you'd like to work with. I think as Andrea and I develop our knowledge base on RDM, that being our website, stuff like this will start to materialize and be a little more straightforward. So I guess in terms of the sources Andrea has up on the screen right now, just keep revisiting those sites, and especially the University of Manitoba libraries.
Next question. From Ruth Ann Marie, need to distinguish between data for which the researcher is the data custodian and which they are not. Yes, absolutely. I think, you know, that again is part of the data management plan. One of the questions is, who governs this data? What parts of your data? For example, if you're in a partnership with, say, a pan-provincial group, who is responsible for what aspects of the data in the project? It's important to articulate that. And then again, when you are talking of deposit, again, who's the governing person? Who's the contact person? What are the stipulations for sharing if you wish to have those options? So I think that's what seemed to be more of a statement than a question there, but clarify, Ruth Ann, if I'm wrong. Next questions for Jordan. Is there any Indigenous representatives or persons who do Indigenous research on that committee? I think they're talking about.
Yes, there is. There is the steering committee. Yeah. So on the research data steering committee, there is an individual from VP Indigenous office. I'm sorry, I do not know who it is, but that is part of the committee makeup.
Jordan, sorry, it's Lisa. It's Jose Lavoie is going to be their Indigenous rep.
Okay, thanks, Lisa.
Next question, who on our team is knowledgeable about the unique issues with qualitative research? I think this is in regards to the steering committee, but I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, Patricia, maybe if you wanted to just clarify there, we could better answer it.
Yeah, it is in relation to the steering committee, in the sense of, I know that, for example, the Canadian Sociological Association had a lot of input into the kind of issues that are going to be raised there. What we consider confidential enough for our purposes is not going to be anything that we would ever allow to be shared publicly. So the sense of expectations from the federal level and how we do them, like in the sense that you have people there who know MCHP or who know Indigenous health, do you have people who understand the kind of challenges qualitative researchers are going to come up against with this?
Sorry. Thanks, Patricia. I think, you know, at present right now, I'm not really sure who would qualify as being the expert on qualitative research. I think your point is well taken. When this steering committee does meet for the first time, I anticipate that there'll be a lot of questions about representation from different areas and who's there and who's not there. So unfortunately, I can't identify anybody right now, but I've made a note of that.
Linda has her hand raised. Linda, if you want to turn your mic on.
Hey there. Just a quick question in terms of, has there been any discussion about the impact of having to inform all of our participants that their data will be stored in a database, and how that may impact recruitment, particularly for those of us that may do research on illegal behavior or behavior that could be stigmatized? Because I do see, you know, having to inform participants that your data is going to be stored in some database at U of M, even trying to explain how well it's going to be protected, it may have a negative impact on our recruitment.
I can address part of that, and Andrea could probably address another part of it. I think as it stands right now, anybody that submits any kind of research protocol has to identify where that data is being stored. So it typically is a U of M database, and that it's probably a shared drive. Maybe it's an external hard drive, but it is U of M. It's not saying that the data deposit has to be in like a Dataverse repository. It could be something else, like a local repository, right? It doesn't have to be something that is run by libraries. We already know that a lot of research teams run their own repository environment, and that might be as simple as network attached storage, or in most cases, it's honestly people using thumb drives and external hard drives. So, you know, databases can be just as secure or insecure, I guess. But in terms of that research protocol, I'm just thinking, Andrea, at the outset, that's identified. I'm correct, right?
Yeah, so again, it goes back to your curation piece, right? Like you don't make or share your data, you aggregate your data according to privacy principles you've outlined with REB. You have taken de-identification strategies so you essentially protect those persons' identities. So when you've taken those pieces, that's a data set that's de-identified. That's what essentially they're talking about here. So there's many levels of data deposit. It doesn't have to be raw, it doesn't have to be the individual transcripts. It could be an aggregated transcript that's de-identified, anonymized. So I think, again, there just needs to be some more understanding about what deposit is, and that this is not like asking for everything that you do, everything that you've used, in all forms, right? This is talking about deposit that could provide some adherence to most or some of the FAIR principles, okay? So, you know, like that does not mean raw. It doesn't even necessarily mean processed. It can be final, right? So those are the considerations here, okay? They're not going to be stipulating that kind of thing, right? And then as people's sensitivity policies become more mature and robust, then there'll be some more informed conversation about what does deposit for sensitive data look like.
Okay.
So if people want to deposit more raw data for sharing, what does that look like? That will be a long time down the road.
Yeah. I think it's going to be really helpful. I think it's great that there's going to be like, one committee kind of discussing some of these issues. I think it may be important to have some task forces or some working groups to deal with some of these specific issues, because I think we do need to get the language right. I think there could be some real implications. And further, for someone that does mixed method and qualitative research, people are doing things like photo voice, gathering data through art-based methods, the cap in terms of the amount of space that's available, that's going to become an issue very quickly. So I'm not against storing data. Some of your response was reassuring in terms of not having to put a full transcript up, which could be very identifying despite taking names and things out of the transcript. So that's helpful. So I think this will be a process. So thank you for your presentation.
Next question, Jordan. What about maintaining access to your data if you leave U of M?
Yeah, that goes back to the succession planning that we were talking about earlier. At the same time, anybody who's running a research project usually has designated, hopefully someone, to be the co-PI or then like the key PI at that point of departure. Likewise with the repository, you're going to have a single administrator, sometimes two. It's typically two from my experience. So the idea is that that's kind of decided as you're working in any kind of repository.
Next question, for Dataverse, there's a limit of data set size. If we have larger data sets, where can we deposit those? So I think that's where the further conversation comes in. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, and I think there's all repositories are scalable. We can increase the size of single object upload to any repository we have. That being said, it goes back to where Andrea and I are saying we meet with research team to determine what their formats are. If there's an opportunity where you have a very large data set, we can break that apart and keep it together using persistent identifiers, so it's identifiable that it's part of that data set. There are options, to discuss. So maybe that's a offline question, Stephanie. We could touch base on that.
Next question, does this apply to existing tri-council grants or new ones only? I think, Carolyn, if you want to turn your mic on, are you talking about deposit or DMPs or both?
I'm talking about both.
We can only assume it would be for grants going forward, potentially starting in either later in 2022 or into 2023 and beyond. They can't, if you're talking about grants you currently hold, I don't think they would do that.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I'm halfway through a CIHR grant, and so I was wondering if that's what I would need to start thinking about right away.
That being said, it's never too late to do a DMP for an existing project you're working on, so something to think about. Next question, I think, yes, so Dr. Nickerson stating here that if NIH funded grant, I believe NIH requires data to be deposited with them. Based on my own personal experience assisting a researcher with a NIH related defense grant application for DMPs, NIH and NSF and other American funders have their already established templates. They've done this for several years now. It is available through DMP Tool. And depending on the grant you're applying for example, genomics, they do stipulate that the data you produce is deposited in that respective genomics database based on the NLM platform. So yes. Next questions from Dr. Labota. Sorry, but this is still confusing for me. What is the purpose of depositing data if they're not to be shared? There's an expectation to deposit all data. I think we've clarified that already. Moving on to the next one. With these policies.
Oh, sorry, Andrew, we jumped over one story.
Okay.
There was one. If there are alternative data deposit arrangements, can Dataverse still be used for the sharing requirements assigned when they do it? Yes, we can use Dataverse for data sharing, data publishing only. If you have it stored somewhere else, yes, we can do that.
Okay. Next question, would these policies extend to inform local preliminary data collection and sharing within the research team, which may contain identifying info and not be deposited or shared later? Will it affect current guidelines on Teams SharePoint use? I'm not sure what policy she's talking about. Is she talking about the data management policy from tri-agency, or is she talking about the institutional policies and strategy? Dr. O, did you want to put your mic to that?
Hello. Yeah, I was just actually wondering about storing of sensitive data, which we currently, write up in ethics in terms of keeping in a locked filing cabinet or on one laptop in an encoded format. Will these policies extend to this area, which it's not really part of data deposit or data sharing at all, but will it impact those policies?
Like physical security?
Physical security, what we write up in ethics in terms of how we store the sensitive data the moment it's collected until we get it into a de-identified state. I believe there was some talk about with the rollout on Teams and SharePoint that was the preferred storage location in order to share it with your team. And it may not affect this at all. I'm just asking if it will affect it.
I think it will affect. It will affect it. As a straightforward answer. Again, but until we have policies and procedures that are directing how that exactly is going to work, I'm not really prepared to comment on it. And I think that in terms of the security concerns that are already present in REB submissions, which is where most of this starts, those definitely will be updated. But it is, again, part of the larger conversation around the strategy we're having here at U of M.
Okay, thank you.
Last question that I see from Dr. Teal. Are people already thinking about how these will increase workload demands be addressed in tenure and promotion for investigators who have to take on this work? Estimates about the amount of extra time to budget for research coordinators, etc.
Well, I'm not really sure that Andrea or I can answer that. We do know that it is a significant amount of upfront work that has to be done here. Going back to looking at other tri-agency policies, will take open access in terms of publishing. There's extra money required for that in terms of publishing in an open journal, so that gets built into the grant. I don't know specifics about what are allowable expenses for RDM, but I'm assuming that's forthcoming, or I hope it is at least.
Yeah, maybe I'll comment, Jordan. I would hope that that's part of an allowable expense inside of a grant. Mm-hmm. I think that this is a group that's requiring it. They should be putting forward the dollars to cover off some of the cost of it. I think this is one of the reasons why it's going to be important going forward as you're developing the university plan, that we're going to have more of these town halls to sort of update people along the way, so that we're actually not finding out at the end, but being able to provide some feedback as you're evolving your plans. The other, so that was one of my major comments. Is I hope that this is the first of a series of town halls that we're going to want to have. I'm also expecting that going forward, it's likely we're going to have these plans at the time of grant submission, as part of your grant, like everything else. What's your plan around data management after the end of the study? And that probably will be something that's audited as typical of CIHR or tri-agency. So I see that, this will be something that people will have to be learning. It'll be really good as the plan evolves, and at the end of the plan to have workshops on helping people to understand what the requirements are and how they embed it and how they develop plans for their grants.
So on that point around data management plans, we are presently being invited from various faculties to give customized presentations around data management plans, potential templates, and discipline-specific considerations when completing your plans. In terms of what a tri-agency grant-specific DMP rubric would look like, Jordan and I anticipate through our various connections with Portage that we will learn what those expectations will be. In terms of processes within the institution to support researchers in understanding what that rubric would look like, we'll take our cues from ORS and obviously support the grant program officers in terms of helping to provide support to researchers that way. Specific processes that way will need to be still to be determined. There's no other questions in the chat at this time. If people want to raise their hands if they have further questions, or you wish to put your questions in the chat, please go ahead.
So just I think I asked it or I mentioned at the beginning, you're going to let us share your slides?
We're recording this presentation, so we're happy to make our slides available as well, like the actual working slides as well as the recording for anybody who wishes to look at them. Yeah.
Okay. And where would we find the video recording if we wanted to watch it and you weren't able to attend?
That's up to the communications. I'm hoping to get a copy of it and make it available in the U of M Library's YouTube channel.
Okay, thanks. I think you've exhausted us, Andrea and Jordan. Listen, this is, again, I think, a beginning. It's really just starting to get people aware. I think our overall, this is going to be probably a year-long or more process. What I want to thank you both for bearing with us. I think there's going to be a lot of misunderstanding, misapprehension, and concerns that are not warranted. But at the end of the day, it's going to be through this kind of a process that I think people will get reassured and eventually come to understand how it's going to work. So we will invite you back. It might be useful to even think quarterly if there's enough progress in between to really let us know how things are progressing so that we can get ourselves revved up to go when we get to the other side and can have feedback actually to, I think, provide the committee as they're evolving things. If this is a place you can test out ideas, we're happy to be a sounding board as a broader community. As you see, everybody's willing to step up and ask questions. So I think this would be a great place to get feedback and help us to shape things. And I'm sure if you need working groups or subcommittees, there's probably a number of people we could get involved to work with you. So please feel free to reach out to us along the way as this is evolving. And then maybe the final point, and maybe for next time we should emphasize this, it sounds like you're going to have to work with the affiliated institutions on this as well. And I'm not sure we had all the affiliated institutions represented through their leadership. So I think it will be important next time that we make sure that the scientific directors of the various sites are actually a part of this invitation list. I haven't scanned to see if they're all here, but I'm sure many of the people who are on the line at those institutions will communicate back to their leadership. But I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to manage as well, because that'll have its own complexities associated with it. All right, well, if I don't see anything more, I'm just going to say thanks again. It's been great, and we will have you back. And hopefully, if you need our help, please feel free to reach out. And with that, I'm going to thank everyone for their time today and we'll give you 5 minutes back to your hour. Okay, take care, everyone.